Welcome to the Sports Philanthropy Podcast. I am your host, Roy Kessel, and today we are very excited to have with us Darren Port. Darren is the CEO and founder of Powered by Professionals. Darren, welcome to the show.
Roy, thanks for having me.
We're excited to have you with us here today. We know you do a lot of great work with sports organizations and all types of nonprofits. And before we jump into the specific types of things that you do, I'd love to have a little bit of your background and how you got into working in this space.
Sure, Roy. So my story is kind of interesting. Unfortunately, it started back when I was 11 years old, and my father was diagnosed with colon cancer, and that kind of got me on this track where I wanted to help. I wanted to do something. I was this helpless kid. Unfortunately, when he turned 40 and I was 15, he passed away. And I was I was in high school trying to find myself. Went to the University of Maryland, kind of like a restart there. Had a great experience there. While there, I started to get involved with charity and giving back, and graduated from there. Came back to the New York area where I'm from. And my mother gets diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer. So really, you grow up real quick. I have a younger sister who was 12 when my dad passed, and who was actually at University of Maryland when my mother was diagnosed. So you become in charge of the family at 22 years old, and I got very involved with charity. I quickly started to volunteer with 3 different organizations. I got very involved with Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. My best friend has diabetes. I got involved with the University of Maryland, and I got involved with ovarian cancer. And I was put on boards at 25 years old. I was running major events in New York City. I was also actually a party promoter in New York at the same time. So I was leveraging all those promoters to help these charity events that we were running. And during the 90s in New York City, I started to run the largest nonprofit fundraising events in the city, all as a volunteer. Fell in love with it. I was learning a ton. Being on the board of Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, on a board that was $4 million board annually to then another board that was $10 million annually. So I was moved from Long Island to New York City. And during all this, I had a day job. I was in the internet space really early on, and got to take a company public in 1999 after about 5-6 years in the business. And I woke up one morning in 01. It was the summer of 01. Totally burned out from the internet stuff. Been doing it about 7 years. Had an amazing experience doing it, but was just exhausted from it. And I said, and everyone knew that I loved doing the nonprofit stuff. And I said, what if I did that every day? What if I woke up every morning and I helped nonprofit organizations grow? I helped them raise money, helped them run major events, and I gave them some business strategy. So I wrote a business plan in August of 01. I showed that plan to a couple of people, just 2 people. And then from there, I ended up, 9/11 happened, September 11th. September 8th, I was at a wedding of one of the guys I had shown the business plan to. He luckily was on his honeymoon when everything happened, and his wife worked at Cantor Fitzgerald, so she survived, but everyone she worked with was murdered that day. So he called me and said, can you help start a charity for kids who lost a parent? You were telling me about that business you launched in August. Could I be your first client? Can you help us? So we ended up launching a nonprofit called alittlehope.org. And that's kind of how this business took off. That was, the end of 01, beginning of 02, when we launched this organization, which is still around today. And I basically, we built it. We've built about 14 other organizations from scratch since then, and have had the privilege of working with close to 75 different organizations, raising over $130 million for different nonprofits over the last 18 years.
Well, it sounds like you've done an incredible job laying the foundation for that. And I'm interested to go back a little bit when you were at Maryland and going through school. What were you studying? What did you think you wanted to be at that point?
Yeah, I was a marketing major. I was interested in sales and finance. Actually, you know, at the beginning, I really wanted to be on Wall Street, which I did work on Wall Street for a couple of years. I thought I wanted to, you know, live that Wall Street dream. You know, you watch enough of those movies, and that's who I wanted to be. But when I got an opportunity to work with, you know, the internet space came about. One of my closest friends in Maryland was one of the guys who really got it early on. Back in 1992, even he was ahead of the curve with it. And in '94, he called me and said, "I need you to come over and join me." So that's when I got involved with that, and got to live. I was on the sales side, so I was head of sales for the internet company, and we did online promotions, like instant win games, sweepstakes, all these different games online. You could scratch and win with your mouse, all these other things. So we had about 10 million people use our games and come through and register.
Wow.
So that was our business before I started to do this full time.
Well, you see some interesting things out there. There's a lot of people trying to raise money online and trying to utilize all of those different technologies. And I think your background when you talk about being on Wall Street and working with an internet startup and being in a position where you handle all of those aspects really helps you prepare to work with the nonprofits, because my experience is that most of the people that are in the nonprofit space, while they might be used to soliciting donations and fundraising in that fashion, they don't have that same sort of direct marketing and sales background and experience that you're describing. And so when you started Powered by Professionals, give us a little sense of what your pitch was to these organizations. Where were you going to help them?
Yeah, I think it was just coming in and first showing them how to look at the nonprofit as a business. You know, a lot of people, because it's a nonprofit, they don't approach it the same way, and it really needs to be approached the same way. Just like a small business, they have the same challenges in starting the company and starting a nonprofit. Um, you know, you know, can you put together a team of experts who have different skill sets and who can work together to achieve a goal? And you have to have clear cut goals. You have to decide, what is our organization going to do? What is our mission? How are we going to be different than the other nonprofit out there? And there are so many nonprofits. The space is, you know, the space is flooded right now with different organizations. I've seen it over the 18 years. You know, the amount of organizations that have come into the space is just mind boggling. So, you know, a piece of it is understanding what the goals are, understanding what your mission is, and making sure you're unique to your space. It's so critical, you know, in anything, but especially in the nonprofit space.
Yeah, I think the challenge we see with a lot of the organizations is there's so many small organizations that are out there and they're trying to do great work in their community, but they never achieve enough mass or scale to truly make an impact. So they'll serve a small group and they'll invest a lot of time really going through and doing the same types of functions that you talk about from a business perspective of understanding all of the different elements of a business, but they probably don't have the expertise to handle all of those areas. So you talked about what your pitch was as you were starting out. Tell us a little bit about how that's evolved now and what types of services and functions you handle for these organizations.
Sure. Yeah, when we started out, actually, we were doing everything. We literally were building websites, helping them with their marketing materials, especially because we were working with so many startup organizations that had nothing. We had to do everything. They didn't have a staff. They didn't have anybody on their team. So we were all aspects. Over the years, we've culled that down to three key areas of service that we provide. One is fundraising, and fundraising is driven by our fundraising is mainly is helping them with their overall fundraising strategy. It's helping them, what does their board look like? Do they have a board? How to build their board? Working with them on how are they going to raise dollars? Are they going to use major events? Are they going to do online fundraising through technology? Making sure that component is in place. If they are going to use events, we have an event division. We help with all aspects of events. from venue, from the beginning of just identifying a venue to the end of writing a script for that night, and for the people who are speaking, for the MC, or for someone who's receiving an award. So we handle every aspect of an event. And then the last piece is the back office. It's like, what database are you using? Who's writing tax letters? How are you tracking everything? And how is the technology being leveraged and tied into whatever everything you're doing? So those are the key areas. It's fundraising, events, and then the back office support.
And when you talk about the back office functions, and that's something that you handle internally for them under a structure, is that an outsourced structure, or do you have a direct like fiscal sponsorship relationship, or how do you have that set up?
Yeah, it's almost like an outsourcing where they are managing it, and we have access to it to help them keep it organized. In some cases, we're actually overseeing their database completely, where for certain organizations that don't have anybody in house, and then in other cases we just have access to come in and do the work that needs to be done, or we give them reports that can be easily uploaded into their systems, so that it's really not a burden on them, but we can manage the majority of it for them, but they keep control.
Yeah, I think the technology aspect is one that I see a lot of nonprofits struggle with, again, because they started with a small organization and one person starting to build that up. And then as it grows, you end up with all of these different sets of data and redundancy of records and files of donors. Of, you have it in a CRM, do you have it in an email marketing system, do you have it in Outlook, do you have it in a fundraising platform? What's the best way for an organization to kind of get their arms around all of those moving parts?
Yeah, what's the best way? I think
It's calling
that
Darren on the Darren hotline to make sure that that you can
yeah,
help them evaluate that, right?
yeah, no doubt. I think I think it's breaking them down into pieces, not trying to staying organized is such an important thing. Making sure you have a timeline on whatever you're working on. So if you're putting together the overall needs of the organization, you want to put it into a timeline, figure out what has to get done first, and then break this into pieces. Because what happens is there's 100 things to do, but when you're a small nonprofit, you can't do them all. And the bad part is if you're not doing them well, right? So it's like check them off one by one. If you have people on your team, either on your board or on your staff, assign them different responsibilities so it becomes a smaller task, if you will, and no one gets overwhelmed by it. A lot of the people involved are volunteers, and you want to be cognizant of that they're a volunteer, and if you don't want to demand, but too many demands on them. Another thing is leveraging the expertise on your board. If you have a board, which you need to have, who's who has those expertise. You want to put a board together of people with different expertise, such as PR, someone who has technology background, someone who has a legal background, the accounting background, just so when those things are needed for the organization, you have a go-to person, and those are the people that can help lead you through those different areas.
So when you work with organizations at the outset, when they come to you, tell us a little bit about what that initial consultation process looks like in terms of how you help them evaluate where they stand and really where those gaps are. Because as I look at organizations, as you said, nonprofits are really no different than other types of businesses from that structure perspective. When you look at entrepreneurs and business owners, they're usually really good at one or two things. They're okay at another one or two things, and frankly, perform pretty poorly at some of the other areas. And the key always is the ones that are willing to let go of those areas that they're not good at or that they don't like, and bring in the right type of expertise. So when you sit down, what does that kind of onboarding evaluation process look like?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with understanding where they are, like what have they done, what has worked, why are they doing it, and what are they trying to achieve. So really understanding the goals has to be number one, and then seeing what they've done to get, to put themselves in position to reach those goals. We're very big on putting together a timeline. Once we understand what we're trying to achieve, is breaking that down into pieces, and then determining what solutions we can provide or that they can provide themselves that'll help them get to reach that goal. I know that's very broad, but that's a big piece of it, is just understanding what the goals are, and then looking at what options do they have. Does it make sense to create a big event? Maybe, and maybe not. Maybe it's not the right fit, or maybe they're not ready for that because they don't have the right pieces in place. Do they have a board? What does their board look like? Does the board understand what their responsibilities are? Did they properly onboard these individuals with some sort of process? Or they just put a bunch of people on the board that don't know what they're really responsible for and don't have, specific expectations. So it's very important that it's clear when you get volunteers involved what you're asking of them, and that you have the proper tools to enable them. One thing that we do as an organization, because volunteers are so critical, is we help identify volunteers, then train those volunteers so they understand what their responsibilities are, and then we empower those volunteers with tools such as letters, materials, technology. So those are the three steps that we get involved with when it comes to volunteers and fundraising.
I think the volunteer area is something, again, that a lot of groups end up starting the process, and they kind of believe that, well, we're a nonprofit, so we're just going to open up our doors and the money's going to come rolling in because we're a nonprofit, and the volunteers are going to come running in. And as you said, there's hundreds of thousands of nonprofits just in the United States. Forget the
Right.
rest of the world. And so it's a competitive market to get those dollars. It's a competitive market to get the time of volunteers. And you have to have a built-in position and, as you said, marketing strategy to really get a feel for what your steps need to be. And what I find a lot of the organizations don't necessarily do well is articulate their story of what they're doing. I've seen some organizations doing incredible work around the country, and that's part of what we're trying to help tell some of those stories. But when you look at what their marketing materials are, you look at what their social media presence or their website, again, they do great work, but nobody would know about it. Or even the way that they're telling that story is not that effective. If they're a small local organization, that might be okay. If they're just touching here the northern suburbs of Chicago, that might be workable. But if you're looking at yourself as a national scope, you better have a way to reach a much wider audience. And what I try and look at with the organizations is, where are those other resources? And that's one of the things from looking at your services that I think that you guys do a great job, is helping them understand where can they get other resources, who are some of these other contacts that they can be connected to. And so as you kind of sit back with them, when you start with a new organization, how much time do you invest into that process in terms of helping them really look at and get a feel for what does it look like? Figuring out all these questions that you've been asking and talking about, that's a long process.
Yeah, it's definitely a process. I think for us, it's once we know we've done this enough times, it doesn't take maybe as long as it would seem, because we can kind of tell where they are in the process, or what they have the ability to do currently. and what maybe they need to put off, because we've seen so many different scenarios with nonprofits. And I think when you look at understanding who are the leaders, who are the founders, what are they driving to do with their organization, and do they have the right people around them to do that, or do they need to either adjust what their goals are or find new people or additional people? And sometimes when you're dealing with, I dealt with a lot of sports organizations, and maybe started by an athlete, um, or someone in the field, and they don't necessarily have the right people involved. They have their initial family or their friend, but there's an opportunity for them to involve fans, and involve successful business people in the community who are passionate about what they've achieved as an athlete. And I think there's a missing opportunity that a lot of these smaller organizations that were started by athletes don't leverage enough, is how to include the community and find roles for these successful business people that would be excited to be a part of their organization. And how to go about that. It's a challenging thing. It's not easy to figure out. So that's something that I think would really add value.
I think athletes have that problem even more than the regular organizations. I see with a lot of nonprofits. Roy starting a nonprofit, Roy looks out at his Rolodex or on his contact list and says, okay, I'm going to grab 10 people that are friends that I think will support what I'm doing. You put them on a board, and then now halfway into a year or a year into this, you look at it and you go, these guys really aren't performing. Now I got to start kicking people off of the board and bringing on some more power and some more strength. Athletes, I think, have a similar struggle because everybody wants to be around the athlete, and they tend to involve, as you said, might be parents, spouses, siblings, buddies that are going to be part of their initial board and their initiative. And then a lot of these people coming in, unlike the business people you're describing, are expecting that this nonprofit that's just getting started is going to be their bread and butter, their lifeline, their income and salary. And again, they're looking at the professional athlete pay scale. They're not looking at the startup nonprofit pay scale when they're trying to identify what they think their compensation should be.
Right, totally. You're totally right by that, and that's a very common thing that we see. And I think if they're open-minded to get the business people involved, will help the other pieces that they're trying to achieve by having their family involved and so on. The organization needs to grow. It has to be more than just them. If it's just them, there's limited of what's going to actually happen, and especially if you don't involve others that have business contacts and other resources. Also, it's more of a strain on the athlete if they don't get others involved. And I know these athletes, they want to do it, they're doing the right thing, but they only have limited bandwidth. Like we all only have limited bandwidth. So for them to expect everything to run through them is it's not a sustainable model, and it limits where they can go with their organization. Like an example of someone who's done it right, is Boomer Esiason. He obviously has a platform where he's able to get it out there and communicate it, but he's surrounded himself with such a group of amazing, successful business people that are connected to him through Maryland, through Cincinnati Bengals, through his work at the Fan and CBS, and he's been able to leverage all of those people to be involved in his charity. So it's not just on him to get it all done.
And I think that's one of the areas where people who haven't had that business background or experience often struggle, because if you've run a business, you recognize fairly early on that you can't do everything. You can't handle all of the functions in a business. You may need to do it for a really small period of time just to get it together and get it started. But very quickly, you run out of that bandwidth if you really want to be a true business, as opposed to just being, in a sense, a consultant, so that you have your own consulting practice. And I think that the athletes, frankly, get very poor advice from many of their agents in terms of the need to have their own foundation and how to set that up. I've seen over the years where a lot of athletes get talked into having a foundation when they really don't even know or have a purpose for it, other than that somebody handed them a shell of a nonprofit and said, "Here you go. Congratulations, Darren. Now you have your own nonprofit. What do I do from here?"
Right. So true. So true. They set it up and they have no place to go. They're not ready for the next piece of it. It's a lot of work.
And the other struggle, I think, is what you talked about, is gaining that traction and figuring out how to make it sustainable. Because while you're playing, it may be sustainable to spend a few $100,000 a year if you want to pay friends and family to be executive directors or staff or things like that. But you realize pretty quickly once you stop playing that, it's one thing to be shelling out $200,000 or $300,000 a year when you're earning multi-millions of dollars a year. But once that income stops, you realize, wow, that's a lot. That's going to start taking away a lot from what I have in the long run. And if you haven't built a sustainable base, I think that's why we see such a large percentage of athletes' foundations really just go away and dissolve within 3 to 5 years of the end of their career. So as you're working with athletes, give us a few of the tips and how you work with them to create a sustainable organization.
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to the putting a board together of diverse individuals that are connected to the cause. So, what is your cause? What is your mission? Who are some of the people that would be excited about being involved in this, or want or have connected? If it's health related, if it's because of a certain type of disease, then let's get families involved that understand how that disease works, who've been touched by that disease by a family member or personally. If it's a cause in the, inner city communities or whatever it may be, or if it's education, or something of that nature, then do a little homework, find out the companies that are behind initiatives like this and who have synergies with your mission, and then see who you can get to because of who you are, or work with someone like an outside company like ours to help you navigate that, to figure out how to find those individuals and then get them involved. But that is so important, because if you don't have the base and they don't understand what their responsibilities are from the beginning, it's going to be extremely difficult to really grow an organization.
And as you talked about, you used the phrase a company like ours. There's obviously a lot of organizations out there that do consulting work with nonprofits and help run those organizations. So give us a little bit of a sense of how Powered by Professionals is different than some of the other organizations out there in terms of the way you approach this process.
Sure. I think what you find out there is there are consultants that do fundraising consulting, nonprofit consulting, and then there are event companies that just do events. There are very few companies that actually bring that all together. And what's different I think one of the main differences about Powered by Professionals and other companies is we're very hands-on. We're actually doing the work. We're not just telling you, hey, it would be a really good idea if you did this. We actually then say, it would be a really good idea if you did this, and now let's do it. And we'll actually roll up our sleeves and help you do it. Work with someone on your team if you have. If you don't have a team, we will actually be that team. So we're almost like an outsourced portion of your company. And what I like to say, it's like you can hire for the cost of hiring one employee, you get like 5 different skill sets. Be like 5 different people, because you don't need the person 24 hours a day the whole year. You need them a few hours a week, but you need 5 different skill sets a few hours a week. And you work with a company like ours and you get that from the high level fundraising strategy to the implementation on these events, and the logistics and the creativity, to the back office and understanding the technology. And then we really get involved in building relationships with the volunteers that are involved, the board, the organization as a whole. And I think that might be one of the things that also differentiates us is the type of relationships we have with our clients. Half of our clients have been with us over 10 years. We're doing, you have to be doing something right for people to be with you that long. And we're so instrumental in the growth of their organizations.
There's no question that that track record speaks for itself as you look at it, because people are very fickle. In today's world, people are very quick to point a finger at why something didn't work. And as you said, I see a lot of consultants out there that give great speeches, great presentations. They'll come in and they'll tell you, you need to do X, Y, Z. And then you look at them and say, okay, well, come and help me do X, Y, Z. That's not my role. And I think that the ones that I'm seeing now that are being effective have the mindset you have. I haven't seen many that have that diverse set of skill set in-house. Typically, they've been more focused either directly on fundraising, development types of activities, or on some of the operational infrastructure, or on events, as you said, in those three areas. And they can come in and they can run an event, but they don't understand how to integrate that event into the entire organizational strategies. They may do a great job creating the theme and executing the event, but tying that all into, as you described, your technology, your donor database, harnessing the power of your board and the breadth of your board. Those are all different skill sets, and having somebody that really understands how those mesh together is critical, because otherwise you just have a series. It would be like having a college class where you had a different professor give every lecture. It might be great content, all 15, 20, 30 sessions you had over the course of the semester might be phenomenal content. But if there's no theme, right, you think about what would that test look like at the end of the semester? It would be a disaster. And a lot of organizations kind of run that way, where they get a lot of great input from really highly qualified people. And I think that goes back to the discussion you had about the board of directors. One of the challenges I see is not only selecting that board and bringing them on, setting the expectations, but now you've got them here. How do you counsel the organizations to continue to educate and train and mentor their board over the course of time?
Yeah, well, I think we work with them and we try to figure out the ways that they can help add value to the organization. And one thing is figuring out what roles are they going to be successful in, because nobody, if you're not putting them in positions where they can be successful and be helpful, they're not going to feel valuable. They're not going to stay involved. So to keep people involved, you have to make them feel good about what they're doing. You have to thank people. That's one thing that, we all think we do it a lot. I know I'm not very good at it. I try to be good at it. You got to continually thank people, especially volunteers. And I've done it. It's like, that's where I understand it, because I've volunteered for close to over 10 years on the board of JDRF, which is a major, diabetes organization, the largest diabetes organization in the world. And I always tell people I got my MBA in fundraising volunteering at JDRF, sitting on that side of the table, seeing how I was treated, seeing what I would have liked. It would have been nice if they had called me and thanked me again, or if they had wrote me a personal note, or if they had come out, gone out of their way and maybe sent me a little gift, or gave me an award at an event, or whatever it may be. What are some of the things that really hit home with that individual, that volunteer? And every volunteer is different, so it's not the same solution for everybody. You really have to get to know the volunteers and see where they fit in. One thing I would say, we have a whole process and that we use around our fundraising events that is really unique. And we create an organizational chart, just like you would do when you're running a business. You got to create a chart to figure out who are the right people we're going to put into the right roles for the organization. And we take such pride in filling that chart with the right individuals and making sure they can be successful. And because it's like, yeah, I want to honor my friend Steve, who's another great athlete, who's one of my buddies. Steve can't fill the needs of that role in the chart and that event, if it's part of an event. And understanding the right person to put in the right spot is just so critical in the success of your organization.
Yeah, I think the hard part for a lot of organizations, especially I think from the athlete and sports side, in a sense, is taking the ego and the relationships out of it. Just because this guy's your best buddy or your teammate doesn't mean he's going to be effective as a board member or as a chair of a golf outing or something else. Now, the decision may be, as you said, in an org chart, that that person's name carries enough weight that just having their name on the top of that invitation is significant enough. But then you better make sure that you're backing it up with a lot of substance below that for the people that can really do the work. If you understand that, you know, Darren is a celebrity, so we're going to put Darren's name on the top, and all we expect from Darren is just to show up and smile and take pictures. That's okay. That might be what you need to do, but you better have a clear handle on that situation. Um, you know, I think one of the things that's interesting right now, you know, as we're recording this in the COVID-19 timeframe, uh, that's one crisis, but there's lots of crises that pop up at different times for different organizations. Give us a sense of what you're seeing out there in terms of how the industry is struggling and how organizations should respond during a time of crisis.
Yeah. Well, there's a number of things we're seeing, and we're actually, trying to be a resource to all these different nonprofits that are out there. Um, One thing that is very important for the nonprofit space is that you need to keep moving forward. You cannot, oh, we're just going to stay silent for the next 6 months because it's not appropriate to ask people for money. That is completely the wrong approach. You need to obviously do it in a tasteful way, and you need to think it through, and you need to have a plan. But you need to be in front of your donors. You need to be actively communicating with your supporters, and you need to decide what's the best route for us now. Is it taking our event online? Is it making it a virtual event? Is it pushing our event off for a certain amount of time? That might be okay, as long as you have a plan, and that you're continuing to communicate with the donor. But communicating with donors on a regular basis is so critical, no matter what's going on. And then to ask how they're doing, not to ask them for money, but to check in on them, to see what's the latest in your life. Is your family okay? And don't mention anything about fundraising. Just check in on them and see how they're doing. They know it's hard for you. They know the organization is going to have some challenges, and the big donors and the ones who've supported you for years will continue to support you because they understand this is when you need them more than ever, and they get it, especially if they have a relationship with you.
What's interesting, we've seen from some of the organizations telling us that as they made those calls to donors to thank them for their past support, and as you said, to really check in. Hey, Darren, you've been a great supporter. How are you doing? How is your family holding up through this crisis? They found that some of these people, fully recognizing the need, told them, hey, while you got me on the phone, I want to make an additional gift, because they recognize that you're not even asking for it. And in fact, you probably, as you said, shouldn't ask for it right now, unless you're an organization that really is what I'll call a direct service. If you're in the medical space, in the healthcare space, where you're doing something directly on the ground to address this. But for a lot of us in the sports space, even though the importance of keeping kids active and busy is critical, and finding ways to engage them is really important as this time is going on. But it's a question of making sure that communication, as you said, is critical. Because if you just go dark, right? If I flip this screen right now and I just leave you sitting there and I've got a black screen and you don't hear any sound, you're going to be like looking around. Where did Roy go? He's asking me for money all the time, and then when there's a great need, he just, like, I'm not even in his mindset. And I think that that's critical in every business of reaching out to the people you do work with and the people you engage with. A lot of us think about it for close friends and family members, but it's important across the board.
Definitely. Yeah, no doubt about it.
So Darren, I know we got a few minutes left here, so I want to kind of take this opportunity, let you put your information in front of people, tell them the best way to reach out to you if they have additional questions.
Sure. Well, I think definitely check out our website at poweredbyprofessionals.com. And there's a ton of information on there. There's information that you can use for your own organization. And there's also give you great examples of the type of work that we do. I can be reached at Darren, DARREN, at poweredbyprofessionals.com. We're very active on social media, on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're on all those different vehicles. And my number as well, if you want to reach me, my office line is 646-278-6735. Happy to be available and answer any questions and be a resource to any of you guys.
And if you're listening or watching this, you can see on our page where Darren's podcast will be hosted. There'll be all of the information and links to their social media accounts, as well as the contact information and their website. So you can just click right on that page there and get all of the information. So Darren, before we let you go, we're going to put you on the spot here. I'm going to use our superpowers that were granted to us by being involved in sports philanthropy. And I'm going to anoint you as the commissioner of any sport that you want. So tell us what sport you're going to pick.
That's a great question, Roy. I think I would be the commissioner of baseball. And
okay.
And what would I do to change baseball? The challenging part with baseball is because it's been around so long and nobody wants to change anything. But we all agree that there's 162 games, and the time it takes to watch these games is painful. So I would figure out a way to shorten the game. I know everyone's trying to do that, and or the season. So I would probably cut the season down about 25% and increase the playoffs, because people love the playoffs and love to get involved, have a few more teams involved, make it a little more exciting. So I would definitely shorten the season and increase the playoffs.
I think those are great points, because when you look at it, the 162 games, it starts in the middle of March Madness usually, right? Not in the current year, but usually in the middle of March Madness, going through the NBA and NHL playoffs. And then you're ending up in the middle of college and pro football season. And it's funny, because the times that you would expect to get the most interest in most sports is the beginning and the end, and yet those are kind of hidden away. The time frame for the length of game, people are really impatient, right? It's hard to get people to look at anything for more than 3 to 10 seconds as they flip through their social media feeds. But I think that you might get your wish this year. It might be a shorter season based on everything that we're seeing, if we even get a season at all. But Darren, I want to thank you for coming on. It's been fantastic to have you involved with us today and learn a lot about how you approach working with organizations and the help that you provide to so many groups. I think your tips are going to be instructive, and appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us, Roy. I really appreciate it. Good luck with everything and stay safe.
Kessel signing off for the Sports Philanthropy Podcast, and we hope you'll join us for our next episode.